But when I'm doing my own style, I do move around a lot, and people have commented on that. Although in my own sort of defense, so to speak, I have to say that a lot of it depends upon the logistics of what I do, because sometimes I'm playing very high up here and then also down here, and the only way to do that is to sort of desperately stand up, you know, and get the right angle and so on. So, but there is a lot of movement, certainly.
Jazz pianist D.D. Jackson has come a long way from his Canada upbringing. Still in his 20s, Jackson has taken up residence in the jazz mecca of the world, New York City. His first CD, Peace Song, won him a Juno Award nomination this year, and he's about to release his second CD. I read somewhere that when you were a kid, playing, that you had this capacity to be able to do pieces from memory all the way through, that you had this kind of amazing capacity there. Is that true?
I guess you could say that. It was more of an ear kind of thing. I did a lot of things by ear. So it wasn't even a question of, you know, observing lots of music and internalizing it in that way. But I would listen to recordings. You know, I remember learning the Moonlight Sonata that way when I first started out, and, you know, by Beethoven and Fur-Elise and a lot of tunes like that, you know. So the first lesson I ever had, for the most part, with the teacher that I studied with here in Ottawa, Dina Namer, for 12 years, I came in when I was about 6 years old and was very restless and, you know, had to leave 3 times to go to the bathroom. But what I could do was sort of sit down and sort of play pieces by ear very well that I'd been listening to, you know, at home. My parents had been playing.
At what point in your life, at what age were you attracted to the piano? When did you start tinkling around with it?
Well, I first heard it when I was, and this is like a cliche or something, but I first heard it when I, you know, in kindergarten class, you know, because my teacher, Mrs. Chapman, you know, she used to like to play the piano as part of her regular teaching, you know, and I really loved it from that point on, so I guess I was about 5 or so. And supposedly, of course, I don't have vivid memories of this, but my parents, I went home and said, oh, you know, get me a piano, get me a piano. So they, you know, they got me one, and just been playing ever since, really.
I want to ask you about the classical route, because you ended up going to school to study classical music on the recommendation of that first teacher you had in Indiana, is that right?
That's right, yeah. It was, I actually studied for a while with Menachem Pressler, who was my teacher here in Ottawa's teacher, you know, so there was that natural connection. It wasn't a very good fit, I would say. It was something that I certainly feel good to have gone through in terms of the whole classical experience, and it's hopefully still reflected in my playing and in my compositions and so on, and in hopefully my technique, but in terms of the genre itself, just wasn't a good fit. So that's one thing I discovered really when I was at Indiana, and in a way it kind of goaded me on, helped me to get into jazz as a career.
You ended up leaving Indiana and you ended up in New York.
That's right.
And you went to the Manhattan Jazz School, is that what it's called?
The Manhattan School of Music.
School of Music, yeah. To pursue jazz.
That's right.
Now, was that, when you say Indiana wasn't a fit, when you started doing that, was it a fit?
Yes, it was a great fit. Actually, the school itself was good, but it was also Don Poland, this teacher that I hooked up with in my second year there, sort of outside of school, and started studying with sort of on the side, you know. That was also very significant, and that was really what kind of got me along musically and conceptually.
Tell me a little bit about the relationship with Don Poland, because it was it had a serious impact on where you are now and maybe even where you're going, right, musically?
Yeah. Well, I met him in the summer of 1990. You know, I was playing at this, or he was giving a master class, and I'd already been following his music, so I went out there and you know, at one point he did this really crazy performance of something and asked for volunteers to come up and try it, you know, and the whole audience, which consisted of, you know, teachers and students and so on, you know, that were of fairly high reputation, they were very, you know, afraid to volunteer. And I was in the front row and I was like, me, you know. So I went up and I played and he liked it, and when he found out I was in New York, I started to study with him for a couple of years, and he had a very, very big influence, really as an overall mentor kind of figure. And then he passed away recently. He was very sick with cancer this past March, and he actually called me to the hospital and asked me to sort of finish this last work of his, which was this big collaboration between his African-Brazilian Connection group, which I'm now continuing to work with after his death, and the Chief Cliff Singers, this Native American Indian singing and drumming group, and the Garth Bacon Dance Company. So I've been doing that work now, touring with that group a little bit as well.
I want to ask you a little bit about that transition from growing up here in Canada and then ending up in the jazz scene, playing the jazz scene in New York, which sounds real good, but it's still tough to make a living as a jazz musician, even when you're near the center of it all in a place like New York, isn't it?
Oh, sure, yeah. The glamour factor is desperately overrated, I have to say. I mean, I'm at the stage now where I am able to make the living and to go out and play and make, you know, occupy the majority of my time as a performer playing the music that I like to play. But it's been and it is a continuous process, and it certainly has been an ongoing, long process.
Do you have any sense of a relationship between your head and your hands and that keyboard?
It's intuitive in the sense that, yeah, that you're not consciously planning things, but it's also the product of a lot of years of work. It has more to do with a certain conceptual thing, and that has to do with years of internalizing lots of different musical influences that you happen to like.
Do you have a vision of where you want to be in another 5 years or 10 years as a jazz musician?
Yeah, I do, but I would always hesitate for fear of jinxing myself to verbalize it. And plus, I also have the understanding that such things, as inherently as a jazz musician, you have to be open to things changing radically and just following whatever career path that things might take you. But in general, I do want to be very open-minded, and I know that'll take me to a lot of areas beyond what I've been doing so far.